Reshaping the Landscape of Belonging to Transform Community. How many of us are familiar with the 4 freedoms in open source? Okay, so if you are theoretical and you like to learn and you want to know what the foundation is, that's something to become familiar with. If you are a transportation planner and your world isn't open source, it's really a great place to start to understand how open source communities, one, not only are they created or validated, but essentially the foundation of how they work. And so the 4 freedoms really guide the WordPress open source project, which I contribute to. And they've helped me understand the work that we do at the community and ecosystem level. And so I want to start off with the 4 freedoms, because without them, open source projects really wouldn't work. I want to take it a step further, though. The thing about tech is that, especially for those of us in the room, we don't always feel like we belong. And I don't know about you, but Slack is it can be a very difficult place to be, right? Because open source contribution is usually done async. You could be anywhere in the world. Chances are you're most likely not going to meet the person that you're contributing with. And when you're in Slack, you could make a comment or two in an open channel. Someone might not respond. And it's really hard to feel like you're part of a project if you're not even getting a general hello or response to the comment that you make. And so I don't know about you, but I've felt like I haven't belonged in a Slack channel 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, like a lot of them. And so, you know, a lot of what support inclusion in tech is about, you know, feeling like you belong, knowing that you are, and then also, you know, being present and being comfortable in your presence. I want to ask you, where do you draw your courage from? You show up, right? Where do you draw your courage from? Anyone want to answer that? Family? Okay. All right. Anyone else? Faith? Okay. Family, faith? Okay. Anyone else? Your friends? Okay. All right. Everything else is scarier? Okay. Your gut? Okay. I saw a hand over there somewhere. Say that again. Oh, I felt that. I felt that deeply. Family, faith, pain. Okay. All right, well, all of that ties into where I draw my courage from. I wrote this essay after speaking at my first national WordCamp, and that was WordCamp US. And Topher DeRosa, who heads the Hero Press initiative for the WordPress community, asked me to write that essay, and I started crying, like bawling, like in the corner. He found me, and it was a very difficult moment for me, because one, I'd never saw myself in that space, and I never saw myself on the stage, and I didn't really fully understand how I got there, aside from the fact that I was surrounded by very accepting people and very encouraging people. And in the course of writing this, my takeaway was, and those who read it as well, is that we are the same. In that channel, we are the same. And I also draw my strength from my family. I draw it from my faith. My family immigrated here from Sierra Leone, West Africa. I wasn't born here. I was born in Freetown, Sierra Leone, the first free colony of slaves. I learned recently that from a family friend in the Gambia, that the second you step foot on the land in Freetown, you're free. So that essentially means when you're running away from the slave trade on the continent, that you were fair game until you put your foot on that land, that gave me chills. I didn't fully understand what it meant to be from Freetown until he told me that. And so I bring all of this with me to every place that I go, in every Slack channel that I'm a part of. And it's amazing that the four freedoms can bring us together. At the same time, it helps us understand that something as beautiful as diversity is incredibly complex. It's essential to our existence. We are just diverse as a whole, right? I'm standing here and I'm looking at this room. I mean, the color, right? The colors that I see, and that's honestly part of our logo for support inclusion in tech, is that you see the range of skin tones and skin colors, right? That's one component of it. Our faiths are different, right? From Christianity, to Islam, that's almost a reflection of it. There's Hinduism, right? There's so many different religions that are represented, from the spectrum of whether or not you're from Europe to Africa, from Asia. When you're all in this space, that's a reflection of diversity, that's a reflection of complexity, and we're all essential for anything to work. And so we were having a very difficult time in the WordPress community, and that's where support inclusion in tech came from. We were having a very, very, very challenging time because this thing called WordCamps bring us all together from around the world. We speak about what we understand, the software to be, but also the experiences that we bring to it and what we create with it. And WordCamp Europe, the regional WordCamp for that part of the world, didn't have many Black speakers in the speaker lineup. And we had speakers in the US, Black speakers, who were looking at that and they were like, okay, there's something wrong here, right? We're present, we're part of this community and we're not represented. We need to see that representation. And so in that moment I thought, okay, so we have the four freedoms, what about the fifth freedom, right? What about an open source community that is truly open to all voices? So we're creating with the software, we have a community, we have an ecosystem, but what about all voices? Support inclusion in tech was what came from that, and we provide funding for speakers to attend WordCamps from around the world. We've sent speakers from 5 continents to WordCamps, and they've traveled within a continent, they've traveled from one continent to another, and we've asked our speakers to share kudos with us, right? There's no funding that's collected for this initiative. Companies don't pay to participate. I don't receive funding at all for any of my contributions, and I've been contributing for about 10 years now. So all we ask of our speakers is, please give us kudos. And here are a few things that we've received. You have the opportunity to remain anonymous. You don't opt into it. It's a given. Instead, you opt into sharing deciding to share whether or not we know who you are. So if you look at this slide right here, the previous, these are 2 speakers that one is the regional US camp and one is the regional for Asia. And the funding that they received to participate at these WordCamps, this is what they shared. And this really touched me. Receiving the funding that took away the costs of travel for them to be present, it gave them the confidence, one speaker, AO, gave them the confidence to navigate the hurdles and fully engage at the event. It meant that my voice as a representative from Bangladesh was valued and heard on an international stage. It meant being seen, supported, and empowered to contribute meaningfully. Someone else said, and this was from our regional US WordCamp, having the financial burden removed benefited me a freedom to enjoy the event to its fullest. Here are 2 speakers that chose to share their names. One said, I was able to prepare and talk and be fully present, focus. This allowed me to focus and be fully present and engaged with other attendees, and encouraged me to continue my involvement in the WordPress community. Remember that Slack channel where we feel like we don't belong? This type of funding encouraged her to continue. And one other thought, that's essential is open source communities are run by volunteers, volunteer contributors, and Joe Simpson is an incredible volunteer within our community, and he shares here the necessities that it takes for you to be at these conferences, they're prohibitive. And that is something that we've kept in mind. We're different in the sense that this isn't the first time that they've tried to do this, within our community. And by they, I mean there are 13 companies that make this possible. 13 of us. There have been other attempts, and those attempts haven't included something that's really essential, which is not just the inclusivity, the visual, but there wasn't an early focus in programming. What we've done is there's a standardized application, and Gravity Forms is a plugin that makes it possible, all the magic happens in that one application. So I have to give my props to Gravity Forms and Mike, who I work with, on this. Thank you so much for updating our license. All of our partners make it possible for me not to pay anything to do this. So that's something, removing the burden of the plugins and the hosting makes it possible for this to be as low cost initiative as possible. So I have to give my props to Gravity Forms. And the form allows us to have a standardized application, but we also have an FAQ page, frequently asked questions. And so you can find all the information that you need there. In that page, or on that page, there's a link that recognizes us as a third-party DEI project, or initiative rather, for our open source project. And we also define on the page the word underrepresented. And so underrepresentation isn't just race, it's not just our religion, it's not just our culture, it's also our abilities, or different abilities. Two of our speakers have low vision. One has low vision, one completely doesn't have vision. They weren't born with it. We have women who've received funding. We have, and I won't get into specifics because they haven't, given me the permission to share that, but we have a range of people who've received support. And that's what's made us successful, is that there isn't anything that you need to do to qualify except to be accepted to speak. That's it. The only requirement that I have, and this was my own particular one, is that you join an anonymous listing of applicants, and that's because we need to know need exists, right? What's the point of saying that there's a lack of representation? You can go to the conference and you can see, there's some faces aren't present, but if you're receiving the funding and we have to show that this need is there, at least just let us include our applicants there. Just let us see the continent that you're from. Let us see the type of travel that you need. So no one can say the need doesn't exist. That's it. And you also opt in to share your kudos. And that's what I reflected earlier, the feedback that we received, how that support matters. So as you're working on initiatives that are meant to be more inclusive for those that are within your community, I think what is really important is for you to modify as you go along. And one thing that was essential to modify after the first cohort, and we've just completed our fourth, is to reset expectations about reimbursement of funds. And so initially we said that you would receive support for travel, and there were some speakers that expected the funding in advance, so they would just receive that grant. And then there were other speakers who were anticipating being reimbursed for their funds. And that's because, one, those are the expectations that they brought to the initiative, but that's also because we had some funders who give you a grant right out, And then we have other funders that reimburse. That's difficult, right? Like when people have different expectations. And so I thought it made sense, rather than have different expectations, to revise the support that we offered and said that you'll get reimbursed. So therefore, there is no immediate expectation that you'll receive a grant. You're coming into this knowing, yes, my travel will be met, my support will be met, but you're not expecting that cash up front, even though there's a possibility. So resetting those expectations meant that everyone knew that they would receive the support without making different decisions for their travel. And that's been great. The 3 cohorts that have followed have just entered it knowing we're good, and that's it. We changed the application, a few fields on there. One is, my language does not have gender pronouns. As someone who is, essentially like raised in the West, it's a first and last name, right? Like that's how we fill our forms out. And our gender pronouns, she, her, he, him, they, them. Well, some languages don't have pronouns. And so I updated the form in order for it to reflect that, because that is also like a cultural component as well. And I spend way too much time on LinkedIn. And there's this really awesome lady who is on it, and her name is Fibria, and she offered insight that was completely new to me, which is that in some cultures, you don't have a first nor last name, you just have a full name. So I updated our form so that it's just your full name and it's not separated out. And this is a reflection of inclusivity and belonging. If you're completing a form for an initiative that's meant to support diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, right? And I can't fill it out. I can't put my full name in it. Like how much do I feel like I belong already in this process? And so that was essential. And then one other thing that we did was include the kudos section within the application form, as opposed to later asking for kudos. And this is really important because once our speakers receive support and they move on, some of them do check their emails, others don't. Life is busy, and in order for you to be selected to speak, for you to even travel to do this, I mean, you're professionals, right? You know what you're doing, you're great at what you do, funding is just an issue for you. You hit the ground running, like you're living life to your fullest, the best that you can. So follow-up emails from an initiative is great, but like if you're just trying to do, what you need to do to survive, those emails aren't critical for you. So including it in the form has been helpful. And we've gotten some really great feedback in that form. And so it's helpful because it removes that barrier of follow-up. If you're thinking about how to do something like this for your own community, I think it's really important to lean into the intangibles, which are the soft skills. So our hard skills, of course, are the skills that make it possible for us to code, right? Like those essential tech skills. The soft skills are what have allowed support inclusion tech to move from its first cohort, its second cohort, its fourth, its third, now to the fourth, and to also start a mentorship program. And that is really questioning not only why do we need diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also questioning, is this working? How could we improve it? When it's not working, problem solving, adapting, deciding what's a priority, and also listening empathetically. And it's really hard to listen empathetically when it's text, because right? Like we're all typing to each other. So how does that come through in our means of communication? It's really, really hard, and it's been incredibly rewarding to do the work for the 13 of us to come together. My company is also part of the 13 in the partnership. I have a private consulting company, and so for the 13 of us to come together and to do this, it's really been an amazing experience. And so I say, when you're doing this or you're looking to create it, question everything, problem solve. If it doesn't move forward, it doesn't mean you can't do it, it just means you have to do it a little differently. So try to figure out what that is. Listen to those around you, ask your family, ask mommy questions all the time, family, faith. It's my faith that's made it possible for me to do this. And Yvonne, she's a leadership coach. We are part of a group called Women, Wine, and Wisdom, and we are sisters in faith. And Yvonne, asked me this question recently: how do you define fearless leadership? So in 2022, we had a lot of controversy around diversity, equity, inclusion in our programs. In 2024, we have a lot of controversy, not just about the 4 freedoms, but in our ecosystem. We're having some conversations about how is contribution being funded, right? And Yvonne has been very, very, very helpful in me looking at the work that we're doing from the perspective of leading, but then also from the perspective of taking me out of that leadership process, and instead seeing that the work has to get done, regardless of the conversations that we're having in the space. Diversity, equity, and inclusion needs to happen, regardless of the fact that I work in transportation planning, and I do that full time, and this is volunteer work for me. The work still has to get done. And so when I look at fearless leadership, for me, it's the courage to work resolutely and to take loving action amidst challenge or distress. So there's a lot that's happening right now. It's a challenge. I am distressed by a lot of the controversy. I'm also encouraged by how a lot of us are showing up and we continue to contribute. My faith is what allows me to do this work. It allows me to love everyone as best I can. It allows me to follow my heart. And it also allows me to be present. But there's something that we all have to consider too, right? There are people who think they know what's best for you in the work that you're doing, in your contribution. They expect you to speak up. They expect you to say what they want you to say. And honestly, we have to step back and think not what others want of us, but what is right for us. So for me, in the WordPress space, it's right for me to be present. It's right for me to seek personal peace. And it's right for me to be present and to do this work lovingly. So, that's my talk, reshaping the landscape of belonging to transform community.